but they wouldn't let me.
Okay, I'll wait my turn. Thank you for both of you for being available today. I want to start questions with Ms. Morissette, if I could. Ms. Morissette, you're a marine mammal specialist, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What mammals do you specialize in?
Right now, I work on endangered species like the North Atlantic right whales, but I've been working quite a lot on seals for my master's and PhD.
Okay, thank you. You must have a lot of background then on seals and so on. How many pounds of fish does a seal eat in one day? Or require?
Well, it depends on the species, but a seal like a gray seal can eat up to 30,000 pounds of fish per year. So that's quite a lot.
Okay. And how many seals would there be in the northern cod ecosystem area?
Again, depending on the species, but for the gray seals, we have more than 600,000 seals, and for the harp seals, the population is in millions. So we have, the populations are exploding right now.
Okay, so can you could you give me a quick estimate as to how many tons of fish those seal populations could be consuming annually now?
I haven't done the math, but it's a lot of fish, and not only like the seals can adapt to. They are generalists, so when there's no more of one type of fish like cod, their population will not decrease because they are lacking food. They will just switch to something else and continue eating, and they are competing as a predator in the ecosystem with cod as well. Cod, when it was abundant, was quite a big fish that was competing for the same kind of food resources than seals were. And there are a lot of questions, and we're trying to figure out the role of seals in the ecosystem, and their part. Yeah.
Thank you. Would you be able to provide the committee in writing the information that I just requested, the number of seals and how many tons of fish they may be consuming in the northern cod, and in the northern cod ecosystem? And when you're saying they're basically opportunistic feeders, they would then, if there are insufficient numbers of cod, they would tend to feed on perhaps capelin or other smaller fish that cod may prey on. Would that be a correct statement?
Yeah, so it would be a double impact because they could eat the prey that could be available for cod as well.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting, because as I mentioned with our last witnesses, we tend to hear at this committee how everyone is competing for the last few fish, but not really looking at why there are only a few fish left, and that's what I'm hoping to get at with this line of questioning. Mr. Barty, you mentioned the LRP, or the limit reference point, was changed without, you feel, transparent transparent consultation. Could you elaborate a little further on that?
Well, historically, the northern cod, of course, it was in the 60s and 70s. It had a massive onslaught of foreign fishing on those stocks. And prior to that, the spawning biomass was in the order of 1 to 1.2 million metric tons. And then, of course, we had this decline that took place, and then you had the extension of jurisdictions, 1977, and Canada started to build up its fishing effort, and we started to build fish plants around the province. We created an enormous capacity. We built up more capacity, different kinds of gear, a lot of pressure.
Sorry, my time is running out very quickly here. You mentioned that the LRP was changed without transparent consultation. Would you elaborate further specifically on that? we've got 20 seconds.
My understanding is that in 2023, there were consultations that were held by DFO, and there were people invited to come and participate in the new model, which is where the LRP emerged from the new model of 2023. And my understanding is that the scientific peer review is an important process in science and in management of fisheries. And that needs to be, it means that all the authorities, you need to have peer-reviewed publications, you have science, that's how science works in today's world. And so you have to have not just the people who are invited by DFO to come and review the documents, but you need to have people that can come because they're interested and they want to have access to the models and they want to be able to simulate the models and just see how the models comport with the previous data that were there. And you see, you had so many royal commissions and reports, like the Harris report and the various reports that made conclusions about the fishery. And it would appear, based on the new model, that many of those reports are out the window, that we had not a clue in the 90s as to what was happening to the resource. And so you got a lot of distinguished scientists who got their names certified, written on documents and publications, and now we're being told that they were wrong. These were wrong. So it's a big event in Newfoundland and Labrador because it's a dispute over the fundamental resource as to whether it's sustainable or not sustainable and whether we've been doing a good job. And so what you got here is that the science that people use, the science that Michael Kirby used in recommending that we harvest up to 400,000 tons, and the science that Les Harris used in 1990 in saying we should be reducing the quota down below 100,000 tons, that all that was flawed because now we have new information going back to the 50s. And so I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm not a scientist. I have no right to make any statement like that. But what I think is that there needs to be a more open public forum where there are people who can come, and not just by invitation only, where there needs to be a sort of a better process. And my sense of this is that there's a lot of...
Thank you, Mr. Verdi. I got to cut you off there. It's gone 2 minutes over time, actually. So we'll move on to Mr. Kellaway now as we finish up this portion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, that's a really good segue. I wanted to say thank you to the witnesses today for your testimony. And Mr. Vardy, thank you for your service to Newfoundland and Labrador and Canada through the various roles you've had. You talked about a shared model of management. I'm wondering if you can unpack that a bit. One of the benefits of having a committee and having experts come in is that we have a certain amount of time, but we don't have a lot of time to unpack terminology. So when you mention shared management approach to the fishery and you cite Iceland and Norway, I wonder if we can break down some of your thoughts in terms of the governance of how that may work in a very short period of time. It's very, very similar to like a game show. We only have a certain amount of time and the buzzer goes off. But I'm wondering if you could provide us a little bit of your experience on what that shared model would look like. And also, thank you for your recommendations today as well. It was very much appreciated.
Thank you for the question. Norway and Iceland are both unitary states. They don't have federal jurisdiction as we do in Canada and in the United States. When you look at Australia and the United States, you see quite a different approach to fisheries management because they're federal. They're federal states. And in the United States, you have a very comprehensive system of joint management that involves the states, not one-on-one, because there are 50 states in the U.S. and we've got 13 sub-national jurisdictions in Canada, or 10 provinces, however you want to look at it. But in the U.S., they have this regional approach, and the regional approach brings the states together. So, and in Canada, what we have is property and civil rights are in the jurisdiction of the provincial governments. So when I was a deputy minister of fisheries, the government of Newfoundland and Labrador had jurisdiction over fish plant licensing and major capital investments in that sector. And then the federal government had major jurisdiction over the harvesting sector and a large extent over marketing and quality control. But that's sort of a overlap on quality between the federal and provincial governments. So what we didn't have a mechanism to bring this together formally under law. And you had people in the industry, they're being regulated, getting one set of regulations. If you're a vertically integrated fishing company, you have to deal with a lot of different regulatory regimes. What we need is one integrated regulatory regime. That's what we did with the offshore. The offshore and the Atlantic Accord created a Canada, Newfoundland, Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board, which brought together those regimes and created transparency. And so that's essentially what we need to do here, in my opinion, is to try to because Iceland and Norway have been very successful in what they've done in managing their stocks. They never let their cod stocks get to the point that ours did. We made a major failure. A lot of that failure was the lack of coordination between governments. Governments were giving conflicting signals. The provincial government was encouraging more fish plants to be built, and the federal government was saying, no, you have enough. And trying to, depending on which minister was in power, you had some ministers which were pro-development, other ministers which were pro-regulation or pro-conservation. And so I think it's about time for us to really focus on how we do the management, because I think the instability of our industry is a large extent attributable to the way we have managed it, and particularly the politics of it, because we should be world leaders in the fishery. We've got enormous resources. If we rebuild those resources, and we talk about mega projects in Canada. The fishery is a mega project, is a potential mega project in terms of, because you look at the amount of fish that we used to produce compared with what we're producing today with failed management, and the potential output of and the value added for that industry is enormous. So it's a big economic development opportunity we're missing out on in Canada, and we're failing, and we should be coming up abreast of the other countries. And the key question we need to ask, and this committee needs to ask, is what does it take, what resources are needed, and what structure is needed to bring forward that more modern industry, which creates a lot more value than what we have today.
Appreciate it. How much time do I have left?
40 seconds.
40 seconds? I'm going to use those 40 seconds and stay with Mr. Vardy. I know, Mr. Chair, but I have the time, so I'm going to use it. In the last set of witnesses, we talked about trawling and how different it is from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Given your experience and having been, at the forefront of the fishery, is there a difference between trawling in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when in the 90s in particular, when you were there, and now in terms of conservation and protection, or is it gray, or is there nuance there?
Well, I think that we've got to look at this in terms of what the mortality of fish. At the end of the day, it comes down to the mortality, how much mortality there is. And technology can be a great friend, but it can also be a big enemy, because we have become so good at fishing, and the auto trawl, whatever technology it is, we've become extremely good. In nature, we can overcome nature. We can overwhelm nature. So we really need to fish more, a better way, and better than we used to fish. Is otter trawling today more benign than otter trawling many years ago? The reality is that if you're fishing spawning concentrations, the fish don't have a chance. They do not have a chance. And Dr. Harris had some really good analogies there, because what happens is the fish congregate. They congregate when they're spawning. They congregate to spawn. They have a big feeding period with capelin, and then when they spawn, they congregate, and they're very vulnerable. And so the otter trawl catch per unit of effort can continue to be level. You can be fishing, and then suddenly it drops off. I mean, so that was the kind of thing that happens in the fishery. And I remember the day when I got a call, when I was the Deputy Minister of Fisheries, and I got a call from the largest fish company, and he said, we are closing down the plant at Port Union next week, because the trawlers are coming in without any catch. With nothing in the trawl. But we reached a point where everything was great, and then until it wasn't. And then it wasn't just a tapering, it wasn't a nice tapering, it was an abrupt fall. And because the technology was so good. So we shouldn't be fishing spawning concentrations, because it's not fair. It's like shooting moose from a helicopter.
I think shoot moose from a helicopter would be somewhat conspicuous as well. But anyway, thank you to our witnesses, as we have to go in camera now to do some committee business. I want to say thank you to Ms. Morissette, and of course to Mr. Vardy as well, for sharing their knowledge with the committee today as we go through this particular study. So we'll suspend for a moment now to switch to in camera.